So welcome to another episode of the Adaptability Movement Podcast. I'm Ben, this is Dan. And today we're going to talk about how you can improve the performance of your team, because there's some things that a lot of teams do really well, and there's some things that a lot of teams don't do well. And when I say teams, I don't generally mean the team as a whole. I mean it could be individuals within that team. It could be coaches. We also talk about business teams or that sort of stuff. So it might be leaders or managers or anyone in that space as well. So to kick off this podcast, I think what I wanted to ask you about, to talk to the viewers about, Dan, is to explain around this whole concept that we speak about a lot, and it's the whole who am I, and it's this came to us through probably through our athletic careers. Actually, I'll allow you to tell a story about how you sort of came up with it,
Sure.
Because that's kind of what you talking about your experience of that kind of made me realise that as well, through my own experience. So I'll let you introduce it.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're here to address today is one of the biggest mindset constraints that's limiting performance, and that is how you see yourself as a person and where you place your own value. So while that might sound like an individual thing, this is the type of thing that becomes part of your culture within the club as well. So we need to be mindful both of the perception of who we are to ourselves, but also how other people are treating us, or how that environment is treating us too. So what we're talking around is the concept that I am more than what I do. So as you mentioned, the personal experience with this was, for me, I've played a number of sports over the years, football and athletics, as a discus thrower being the two most prominent that I had. And throughout the discus career, post-footy career, and coming back as a para-athlete after injury, one of the things that I experienced with a loss of football was what felt like a loss of identity. And so, like, who am I now? I'm not this strong, powerful, athletic footballer. And while I didn't always externally sort of identify myself as that, in fact, I almost pulled back a bit because I didn't like being sort of categorized as just this one thing. When I got into a discus career with different ways of measuring success and different expectations that both I placed on myself and other people did, rather than having 2 hours to go out and perform and do something during a game, which was of value, and then feeling like I was okay because I'd contributed, now I had 6 throws, maybe only 3 if I didn't qualify for the second 3. What it really highlighted to me is my inner dialogue, so my inner voice was going, okay, I didn't get the number that I need to get to be successful or to qualify for a team. Now I've got 5 throws left. So it was like this countdown clock in my head. And with each missed opportunity, you might call it, I was applying or feeling more pressure on myself to then be able to realise it in the next one. And I remember going through a qualification period for the World Championships in 2017. And I'd had great prep, and then injury interrupted during the main part of the qualifying season. I just needed one more qualifier. And I went through the succession of events outside of the regular summer season. So there's a gap because we're traveling to somewhere else in the world, so our summer season doesn't line up with theirs, which meant that we'd finished the main part of competition. We had to organise more events to be able to get that additional qualifier once I'd recovered from my injury. And winter season in Adelaide, there were some interruptions with weather, so there was some frustrations around, it's going to be difficult to throw a qualifier today. And then I finally got this event where everything felt like it lined up. There's perfect weather conditions, there was the perfect wind, and I went out, and the first 3 throws I threw within, I think it was 3 centimetres of what I needed to get without getting it. And from that point on, the countdown clock was ticking, and my inner dialogue was sabotaging. It was telling me that, come on, you should be able to do this. Here's everything you asked for. Like, why aren't you good enough? And I missed the opportunity that day, and there was only 2 events left after that. I remember being really hard on myself. I remember going, just sitting there, feeling a bit sorry for myself, but mostly sort of judging myself for not having been able to perform in that moment. And about half an hour later, thankfully, that mindset became what I now know is more adaptable. And it went, well, hang on a sec, you've been in positions with this before where you've felt a sense of failure, and how many times have you been in a situation like this where you felt suboptimal, but you've gone on to achieve the thing that you wanted to achieve? And so with that little bit of motivation, I was able to go on and compete in the further 2 tournaments where I finally got my qualifier. But the thing that made the biggest difference for me during that is because of that moment of hardship and suffering where I was placing that extra expectation myself, thankfully I reached out to a mate. And that mate just happens to be someone that performs at a very high level in volleyball, has had the experience of both missing out on a number of teams before he was able to sort of, successfully sort of make them and go on to bigger things. And I said to him, I was like, how do you do it? Like, how do you go through a process of not just accepting failure, but the idea that you're not performing at the level you want to perform at, or that you realise or recognise that it's something internal that's limiting you. And he said to me, well, you got to remember that you're more than just a discus thrower. And I was like, it was just like this epiphany. Like in this moment, I was like, that's so obvious. Yeah. Like, of course it is. Like, discus throwing is one thing that I do, as is being a partner, as is being a son or a brother or whatever it is. And the problem is that we identify with the things usually that we do well, because that's what makes us feel good about ourselves. And for me, growing up, as a teenage boy, I think a lot of people at that age are trying to find who they are and what their identity is. And footy came in for me quite late in my teens. I'd been a soccer player until then, and at that point I discovered something that I was relatively good at. And so that it became really easy to identify with that and go, well, this is who I am. Like, I'm meant to be a footballer. And that can serve a really useful purpose early in that sort of development as a person. But if we're attaching ourselves to that, if we're holding on to the idea that we only have worth if we can perform and that impresses other people, and in this case it was a footballer, but in other places that could be a CEO at work, it could be someone in a leadership role within a sports club or a local government. If we identify strongly with that as being our sense of self-worth, then what happens when that's not available to us? What happens when we move on from that job's taken away from us, we get dropped from the team, whatever it might be, like, who are you then? And so I think we're quite good at picking up themes. Like, we work with a lot of teams and things that we notice when they come to our attention, we try and record them so that we can come and share them with our listeners and other people that we work with. And that thing has popped up again for us recently, and that we're hearing a lot of people talk about that the athletes are underperforming because of perceived pressure. So what I mean by perceived pressure is it's different from real pressure. Real pressure is, someone puts a knife to your throat, well, there is a risk that something bad is really going to happen, right? Perceived pressure is the idea that I might get dropped if I don't perform well, or I might get, sacked if I don't perform well. And it's the thing that where we are living in fear, and because we're living in fear, we're constantly trying to escape a feeling rather than moving towards what would be optimal. So coming back to what you very first said is who am I? This is a process that we run people through within our academies, within our programs. And it might sound simple, but it has a profound effect on people, because what we do is first of all, we go through the process of defining who they are based on their roles. And then we go, cool, that's all of the things you do, but that doesn't actually describe who you are. And so then we move on to another process which starts to reveal that intrinsic value, and it improves that sense of self-worth, which then also is then radiated out onto others. Within a team environment, that becomes contagious because it gives other people space to do the same. When we're self-aware of that, then we offer other people the support to do that as well, and we remove ourselves from a place of judgment of others to a place of compassion. Yeah. Which obviously builds better connection.
Yeah, and I don't know if you had the same experience, but like growing up being a footballer, particularly playing at a high level, the first thing everyone would ever ask me is, "Oh, hey Ben, how's footy going?" Right. It's like that. So then that fuels that identity around I'm Ben, I'm a footballer. Like that was my identity for 10 plus years. It wasn't until I realised that no longer football was going to be my number one focus in life, that other things like my career, our business, family, relationships, all that sort of stuff, were going to take the floor in that. Then it wasn't. I finally realised that, oh my God, and we had discussions around this and stuff, and it was in that process of making the decision to finish up playing at a higher level that once I realised that I'm more than footballer, that decision became really easy. And going through that process, like I felt like, because I'd always been the footballer, so I was like, I had the fear that, you spoke about fear. I had the fear of, if I no longer play football at a high level, will people respect me just as a person? Because, okay, take away the football, who am I type thing. So, but I remember, how this can relate to for coaches or players who are going through a similar experience or trying to learn more about this sort of stuff, is that I remember there was points in my career where the coach told me, if you don't play this week, you're getting dropped. And it's like, then that whole fear, you speak about fear, like, it's very rare that you see someone perform when they're under threat like that or something, because then I became so desperate to do everything right that I was overthinking everything. I was trying to do things, and I was almost trying too hard. Mm-hmm. And then you try too hard and things don't work out, and then you start to go, shit, it's all right, it's been a quarter, I haven't done what I need to do. It's been a half, and it's been 3 quarters, and by the end of the game, then you're sitting there going, I didn't do enough to keep my spot in the team. That whole next week at the footy club, you're dreading going into there all the time. You don't want to speak to anyone. Like you avoid the coach because you don't want to speak to him in case he pulls you aside and goes, no, we're going to drop you. So from a coaching perspective, actually developing relationships with your players beyond the football, netball, soccer, whatever it is critical, because if you don't have that relationship that goes beyond the performance of the sport, then when a player is struggling, or you do need to potentially drop someone or something like that, you don't have that trust, you don't have that bond between you that then you can actually work through that, rather than just going up, then all right, you dropped it, all right, cool, see you later type thing. Like, it needs to be something where, from my point of view, as a young player, if the coach had there were coaches that did this really well, actually, that supported me and went, all right, Ben's not playing well, let's actually let's have a catch up, have a coffee, like, let's chat about other things outside of life, what's going on in life, what's going well, all this sort of stuff. And as a player, I started to feel a lot more relief and a lot more comfortable around talking to the coaches. And it's like, oh, the reason I haven't been playing well is because I just went through a breakup, or I did just I'm struggling with my studies or something like that. And like there's more to performance than just their ability and then what they do on a Saturday. So.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And one thing that I feel like, if we take a couple of steps back to root cause, is it's so much easier to perform at our best when we feel valued. Yeah. And when we feel like there is a sense of trust and empathy and compassion and those sort of things. So the idea of being, okay, you might think that it's a good idea to give someone a warning that they're at risk of being dropped, but how are you delivering that message? Like, what sort of trust is in that relationship? Like, could it be delivered in a different way, where it comes from a place where you feel both supported and valued in everything you do, regardless of whether you are playing seniors or reserves, regardless of whether you are contributing to a leadership team in an organisation or not? It's like that you're acknowledged for your role and your willingness to give. Because it's rare that we perform at our best when we're living in fear. Like, fear is a really low energetic state, same as shame, same as guilt, which is, we've talked about this before. They're not usually very helpful behaviours, except for kind of moral recalibration if we really have gone off track and done something that's out of alignment with our values. So when we sit in that place of kind of choosing from love or optimism or hope, then that gives us more energy to be able to perform. It gives us more of an opportunity to think clearly and to be able to go out and do the things the way we want to do them. But if we feel like a bad performance equals a bad person, or a bad performance equals I have less value, well, then we're constantly just playing this yo-yo game with our emotions, which are up and down and up and down. And of course, that's not going to be the optimal state for performance, is it?
No. So I think, like, a big thing with this is not, as you said, like, valuing someone for not valuing someone for what they can do for you, but who they are type thing. And I think that then comes down to that, if you are a player or a coach or a manager or someone, that your relationship with that person doesn't change based on their performance week to week. Like, you don't have more conversation with someone when they're doing really well, and then less conversation when they're not doing well. Like, you got to have that consistency across the board. So, the idea here is that we're trying to give you some takeaways that you can take in. If you're a coach or a manager or a boss or CEO, whatever you want to phrase it as, your role is to develop that relationship to where it isn't a transaction. Like it isn't all right, you've done something really good for me, so therefore I'm gonna I'm gonna do more for you. I'm gonna invest more time into talking to you. I'm gonna invest more resources or whatever it is into you. It's about developing that so that no matter what's going on, that it's a consistent theme's probably not the right thing. The consistent
behaviour, pattern, culture.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, through the entire time. So that's something that's pretty critical. And a lot of the clubs and teams and stuff that we've worked with, like you start to talk about this sort of stuff, and then they're like, oh yeah, of course. Like it might not become first nature to them, like to actually think about someone as, all right, this is just because this person can go out there and kick me a bunch of goals or take me a bunch of wickets or whatever it might be, like doesn't mean that they're better, and that I should value that person more than the person over here who actually could bring something completely different. That
they might help other people perform better because of the culture and the encouragement and support that they offer to a group.
I mean, there's certain people, like even with me within my footy club, there's certain people that I love to play with, not because they're better at getting more kicks or marks or goals or whatever it is, but because they make the people around them better. Yeah. And I love that theme of how can you make your teammate look better or your colleague look better or something like that. How can you do something that isn't going to get you credited with a whole bunch of stuff, but it's going to make someone else's job easier, it's going to make someone else feel better, it's going to bring, so the whole net score, or net total of your team is risen, but you are not necessarily doing it for your own self-gain, it's for the good of the team.
So you mentioned like leaders within these organisations before and how they can influence this. It's the concept that we're moving beyond treating people as a commodity within our team or organisation and just, like you said, valuing them for who they are rather than what they can do for you. When we feel like a commodity, we feel used, it feels transactional, it destroys trust. And so we always think that someone is trying to get more out of us or that they're not acknowledging us enough for what that is. So it really comes back to being more supportive, giving people acknowledgement and value for their contribution. And it's that whole thing where rather than just rewarding someone with praise for an outcome, reward them for effort. Reward them for the process, the things that have led to that outcome. Because if you do that, those people will recognise the value in doing more of those things. If you do it on outcome, well then every time that outcome doesn't go the way they want, there's going to be this sense of disappointment, failure, I don't have any worth. So it's one of those kind of like curious things where this is the outcome we want, so we focus heavily on that, but when we focus heavily on that, we rarely get the outcome that we want. Whereas if we've identified the outcome we're trying to seek and then place our attention to all of the things that go into making that possible, well then that's when we generally get the thing that we really want. And it's one of those life lessons, I guess, like those things that, when you're growing up, it's very much A plus B equals C. Yeah. And, at some point during your life, you identify there's grey areas and there's, other things that need more of your attention, and that it's not as simple as that, I guess.
Yeah, and I think like to wrap this all up and circle back to the whole theme of this podcast about, who am I and how you can do a better job of either yourself, like being more aware, like becoming more self-aware around you and like the value that you have outside of your sport or your job or whatever it might be, or as a coach or leader or manager, how you can do that with someone. It's about just discovering what you're passionate about, like what in life brings you joy, brings you energy outside of work or sport, and how can you start to incorporate more of that in your life, or even more of that within your sport or work, so that you can your energy. You feel like you just, every time you're doing stuff, your energy is building, and you're not just feeling drained more and more and more. So it's taking someone through a process. I mean, we do this within the academies and the works, the programs we do, but taking someone through a process of discovering their passion and what actually like gives them energy. It's actually not that easy of a task. Like it's quite a challenge to
There's
go
often
through
a fear in fronting up to that, because people have avoided it because they haven't recognized it yet. And so when they get to that point, it's like, oh, I don't want to go there because I've not actually solved that in my life before.
Yeah.
So our job is to make that a really disarming and safe place to do that, and to reveal how simple that can be and how good that can feel when you do it in a way which comes free from expectation.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the times we've almost helped people to reveal stuff to them that they never actually thought of. They're like, oh, I didn't actually realize I was that passionate about that, or it's something that might seem small to them could actually, oh, well, actually I can start to focus more of my energy on this and make it a bigger thing, which then is going to give me more of that energy and happiness, joy, whatever you want to call it.
So there's a lot of information there. You may need to listen to this a second time to unpack it all, but the key theme to this podcast was to really go, maybe take a moment now to just sit down and contemplate who you are, like who you are beyond all of the roles in your life, and where is that intrinsic value for both you, as well as, then being able to share that with other people around you. As a leader, like, could you develop relationships better within your teams? Could you spend more time being open and honest with people and acknowledging and being supportive in a way where they feel safe and like they're an active and valued contributor to what's going on, and the team is better with them in it? And that could be for a whole host of reasons beyond just their work performance or how many goals they kick on a weekend if we're talking about a sports-based scenario. So I think, if we give some attention to those two things, there's going to be some great value in that for both leaders and their teams to practically advance the performance of teams and their people.
Yeah, great. And if to get in contact with us, you head to our website, the-adaptability-movement.world, or you can find us on socials. Dan and I are both on LinkedIn. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit the subscribe button so that you're constantly getting updates from this as well, or follow on whatever podcast stream you're listening to this on. So get in touch, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Terrific. Thanks for listening to the Adaptability Movement Podcast. If you like what we do, please subscribe, share this podcast, and you can find us at the-adaptability-movement.world or email us at info@the-adaptability-movement.world.